Welcome to the Amadeus Airline Podcast, the podcast with the insights for the airline industry, where we keep you up to date with the latest developments in airline technology and business. Brought to you from the experts at Amadeus, the world's leading provider of airline technology. Hello and welcome, friends, to the Amadeus Airline Podcast. In this podcast, we cover topics like how to optimize your network and sales, how to use data for better decision-making, developing customer loyalty, and more. I'm your host, David Lengen, Amadeus's VP Marketing, and today I'm pleased to bring you the latest in our podcast series, Network Planning, A New Normal or Business as Usual, presented by Jim Barlow, Amadeus's Vice President Strategic Consulting. Jim will be joined by topic experts Renzo Vaccari and Jeremy Millian to discuss the latest strategies for airlines to manage their networks back to recovery, including identifying new data sources to supplement network planning when historical data is no longer reliable, maximizing your airline's profitability and operational reliability, and how airlines can optimize their network with fewer resources. Jim?
Thanks, David. I'm very excited to talk to you all about the interesting challenges faced by airlines as they develop schedules in this new COVID world. With me to talk about this are our two panelists, Renzo Vaccari, Senior Vice President of Amadeus SkySuite, and Jeremy Millian, Director of Sales in the Amadeus SkySuite. Both Renzo and Jeremy have years of experience in working with airlines to build network planning and scheduling models. They've worked at airlines before. They have built these models. They have interacted with dozens of airlines around the world and have a very good sense about the art and the science that airlines use to be able to solve this very important business function. After all, the core schedule at an airline is its core product. It's what they fly, what they sell, and everything else that the airline derives from the schedule. And so getting it right, getting it maximally profitable and operationally feasible is more important than before. But in the COVID-19 world, as airlines try and deal with this, the phrase COVID affects everything certainly applies to the schedule development process. There are a lot of challenges that airlines face in going through this. Do the old assumptions about starting from the same schedule in the previous season, does that still apply? Are all the data still available to be able to do this? What exactly changes? And again, getting this right is so important. So the panelists and I will talk about the challenges that airlines face in this new world, building a schedule, and then also some thoughts upon how they could meet these challenges using available technology and data. So with that, perhaps I could start by asking both Renzo and Jeremy, starting with you, Renzo, please. Tell me your thoughts on exactly why this is a problem. What specifically are the challenges that airlines face as they develop schedules in this new COVID world that we're living in?
Hi, Jim. It's a pleasure being here. So certainly some things have changed dramatically. If you look at demand, demand is down 80% and 90% depending on the part of the world. So certainly there are elements that make this a new normal. Because when you think of network planning and scheduling, and you think of what is it that we're trying to achieve, matching capacity to demand, if demand has changed dramatically, then schedules need to be resized. Schedules need to be shrunk. Fleets need to be retired. So certainly lots of elements of a new normal. Now, in terms of the business process itself, of creating a schedule, I think it really depends. So if your scheduling process was one of using, last month's schedule, last year's schedule, if that was your business process, then you are certainly going to have to change that. Because the schedule that was built a year ago, a month ago, assuming 100% demand is certainly not going to be optimal. If your business process was about building the perfect schedule, with a perfect data 6 months out and then freezing that schedule for the next 6 months, assuming that demand is not going to change, assuming the competition is not going to change, assuming that fares are not going to change, then that also is not going to work, and it's going to require a new normal.
That's fascinating, Renzo. Jeremy, could you give me your thoughts on how we might define this problem, the challenges that airlines are facing? Renzo focused on how demand has changed and whether or not the old schedule, the old hub structures, the old choices of routes, the old number of aircraft employed by the schedule necessarily would change. And I'm interested in your thoughts on that. But can you also talk about building in a certain amount of operational resiliency into the schedule in the part of the development process? Because it seems like COVID-19 has certainly required airlines to think in terms of much more operational resiliency, that let's plan for a certain amount of change as well. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that as well.
Excited to be here and talk about this, Jim, and that's a good point. So the data piece in terms of the demand, obviously that's the one everybody kind of focuses on, and for obvious reasons. But the operational piece is also extremely important. The same elements, and what I mean by elements, meaning the inputs that the airlines were using previously, they're still going to be there. So the amount of time it takes to turn an aircraft out of a station, the amount of time it takes from fly A to B, those inputs are still the same, but they're evolving. And what I mean by this is the amount of time, for example, that an airline will take to change an aircraft at a station is going to be longer now, because previously they just had to have passengers and bags, get the people off, get the people on. But now they're going to have to actually clean and disinfect the aircraft. They may have to have additional timing at an airport because of additional security measures that are in place, because of maybe health checks and things of this nature. And these whole processes are going to be evolving themselves. So it's going to be more of a look and feel, an adaptation of how things change as the processes change. And airlines are going to need the ability to evolve themselves and see different types of scenarios that will work. You mentioned the way the airlines fly, and then what I mean by this is the business model. The old model of bringing in hundreds of flights into one station and then connecting people to and from and then sending them back out again doesn't necessarily apply, because the airlines aren't flying at the same level of capacity that they were before. So those structures that they had in place, they won't make sense now. So they need to kind of take a sort of a fresh look to how they fly. Should they do that connection? Should they fly more of a point-to-point type of emphasis? All of these things are going to factor in more. The capacity of the aircraft. They won't be able to necessarily fly everybody. They may have to block seats in order to provide spacing for passengers from health reasons. All of these little operational effects that are always have been present, but have basically been turned on this head as a result of COVID. These are the things that the airlines are going to have to focus in addition to the demand problem that they're facing.
Thanks, Jeremy. What I'm hearing from you both, is that the old rules don't apply. That if an airline built their schedule starting from the same season in the previous year, that's not a good starting point anymore. Too much has changed. If you base the schedule development process on having data on passenger demand, well, that data may not be good anymore. If you're basing it on how quickly we turn the planes before COVID, that won't apply. So some of the old assumptions when building the schedule no longer apply, and we're going to have to make up new sets of assumptions. So Renzo, let me start with you. I'm interested in your thoughts. Given all of these challenges, then how should airlines build a schedule in this new COVID world?
So let's talk a little bit about the solution here. So we know that demand is changing, and we know that it's going to drive certain changes. But like Jeremy said, does the actual process of network planning and scheduling change that much? So the idea here is to build the best possible schedule. And typically, if you think of a schedule, so let's talk a little bit more about the problem. So if you think of the schedule, think of this puzzle. You have hundreds, maybe thousands of aircraft, hundreds, maybe thousands of flights. And then you have to be able to put them all together and build the best possible schedule that is going to maximize profit and also be flyable, as you said, Jim, from an operational perspective. Traditionally, the way airlines tackle this problem is by starting with an existing schedule, because they want to, instead of building a puzzle from scratch, they want to reuse as much as possible. So the traditional method is I start with an existing schedule. I know it's a schedule that works. It minimizes the number of changes the network planning area needs to make. It minimizes the changes operational teams needs to make. So basically, it's minimizing the changes, it's minimizing the complexity around the schedule development process. Now, if that is your schedule development process, then there are going to be also big changes there, because unfortunately, the existing schedule is not going to work anymore. So using last month's schedule, using last year's schedule, is just not going to be good enough, because the demand is so different that a schedule that was optimized to be able to fly 100% of demand is definitely not going to be the right schedule if you only have 10% of demand or 20% of demand. So what you really need are new capabilities. So you need the ability to be able to two things. Be able to build a schedule from scratch, and we call that clean sheet scheduling, so that you can optimize and match capacity to demand without being limited by what's happened in the past. And then you also need the ability to, once you've built the schedule, to adapt it quickly. Because what happens in the past, if your scheduling process was one where you would build your schedule 6 months out, you would freeze that schedule, and then you would fly that schedule, that is also not going to work in this new normal, because demand is going to fluctuate, fares are going to fluctuate, competition is going to fluctuate. So you're going to need the capability to be able to adapt schedules, very quickly. Now, is that a new normal? Is that business as usual? Jim, I think it really depends. It depends on what was your process. So if your process was, like I said before, if your process revolved around just always starting from an existing schedule, then yes, this is indeed a new normal. If your process was to take advantage of new technologies, new capabilities, and be able to be more adaptive and be able to build schedules and change your schedules in a more reactive, quick, and adaptive way, then this really is not that different. The technology exists today, so that you can go ahead and build schedules from scratch. So some of the things that seemed impossible a few years ago are possible now with new artificial intelligence, optimization intelligence. So the capabilities are there, and as a matter of fact, there are airlines today that are building their schedule this way, that are running network planning this way. Our mission here is really to bring those capabilities from just some airlines, the bigger, more progressive airlines, to every airline in the world that wants to use these capabilities.
Jeremy, it sounds like the key in Renzo's answer is this sense of clean sheet optimization. So in the spirit of COVID-19 changing everything and the old rules not applying, that you need the system. You need some way of having the system telling you what the new schedule should look like? What are good scheduling ideas to propose based upon the information that you happen to know now? Since that's a central point of what the new normal is going to look like, could you tell us a bit more exactly what clean sheet optimization is? What is meant by this and how does it work? Again, this seems to be a very important concept in being able to address the challenges today.
Yeah, so clean sheet, as the name implies, is really kind of starting from scratch, starting from sort of a blank, clean slate. But you're still using the same inputs that the scheduling department is used to using. So it's not like you're completely using something foreign. Those same inputs we mentioned earlier, the amount of time it takes to fly an aircraft from A to B, the amount of time it takes to turn an aircraft, all these operational elements that are always have been used in the scheduling process are now put into it. But what you're doing is you're coupling that with the demand and the commercial pieces of it. You're giving the system like how many times a day should you be flying? 3 times a day, 4 times a day. But instead of you manually trying to come up with a schedule that fits that puzzle, as Renzo alliterated on, it's more of letting the machine optimize and come up with it for you. The thought of a clean sheet might, to some airlines that are doing it today, it's business as usual. To others, that prospect, of minimizing the changes that they used to use was the normal business, but now they can't. And why? Because they actually are having to clean sheet because they may not be flying now, and they're maybe starting from having 0 flights to having 10 flights or 20 aircraft in service. And not only that, but the adaptation piece that Renzo had mentioned is also important because they're going to be ramping their schedules up. No airline is probably going to go from flying 0 flights today to flying their full schedule tomorrow. It's going to be more of a gradual increase, and that gradual increase is more of a factor of what makes sense from a commercial perspective, but also just what makes sense from just an overall operational perspective in terms of dealing with the environments and the changes that they're having to deal with. And technology that exists today can help the airline do this because they need the ability to have a scenario-driven approach because they don't have the luxury of time like they used to. They need to have tools that are going to help them come up with different scenarios to say, what if scenario A looks like versus scenario B? Because, again, they're less manpower, less time, but yet they still have to produce a schedule that's going to be commercially the best that they can given the current situation.
Renzo, whether an airline is doing clean sheet optimization today, or if they're not, and they need to start thinking about doing it in future, it seems that having the necessary data to be able to run this process well is absolutely critical. Could you tell us about the data needed to be able to apply all of these principles, again, specifically in a new COVID world?
There's one thing that never changes. So all of these models require data, good data, garbage in, garbage out. Even the best optimizer, if the input data is garbage, the output will be compromised. So certainly, Jim, the old traditional data is not going to be good enough. So when we look at historical data and you look at data from a year ago, that certainly is not going to be helpful in this case because demand has changed so much. Competition has changed so much. Governments are opening and closing, so there's a lot of uncertainty. So that traditional data is not going to work, we must understand that airlines have a tremendous access to data, both internally and externally. Several new data elements come to mind immediately. Shopping data, for example, or future search traffic data. That is available today. It is already available. Some airlines are already using it. This data can be collected from both direct channels as well as GDS channels. This data can be summarized, for example, at the market level. And then And then you can start making very interesting correlations. Once you get creative with the data, you can start making some very interesting correlations. You can correlate, for example, this future traffic search data, and you can see that if you see some increase in search traffic volume now, you can, for a particular market, you can correlate that to a Y% increase in bookings in X number of days. Another very interesting source of data will be short-term booking data from your revenue management system, because short-term revenue management data will give you that latest insight on demand, and you can compare this specific data with previous booking data, and you can then start applying those ratios to the historical market sizes to estimate the expected new demand. All said, though, I think that it's not just the new data, but the way you're going to use the new data. So I think you're not going to be able to get away from the fact that there will be significant uncertainty for the immediate future. So airlines, instead of just using one set of data, they will be using multiple sets of data, running multiple runs, having multiple scenarios, and then looking for scenarios that are very stable across multiple scenarios of data.
With all of that, Renzo, it sounds like the getting the data is very key. I appreciate the sense of optimism you have that if the old traditional sources of data do not work in this new world, recognizing that airlines are awash in data, we can get creative and find new or other sources. And the shopping search data certainly seems to be very interesting. Again, it's something available today, a very good indicator on where demand is coming back and when it's coming back. Again, that sort of information or things like it are available now. Renzo, your focus was on the demand side, which was certainly important. Jeremy, let me ask you about the operations side. So what kinds of data specifically should airlines assume as they build an operationally resiliency into the schedule? So you mentioned, for example, the need to disinfect the aircraft as it sits on the ground awaiting passengers. That seems like it would require more time at the gate. How is that sort of thing built into the schedule development process? And what kinds of data would need to change to be able to build in an operationally resilient schedule in this new COVID world?
So there's a few points that basically definitely need to be factored in. We call that the turn time basically of the aircraft. That's what I was talking about with the ability of the time to do that, to disinfect. Obviously, you're going to have to work close with your operational groups to say, hey, how long does it take us to do this? But other data elements with respect to either government entities and the airports themselves, they're going to need to get an idea of how about the check-in and security times. Are those processes getting longer? Because that needs to be factored in. Because not only do you want to just build your schedule around that, but if you're connecting passengers, well, the connections times now have to change, because if you're getting longer on the ground to move the aircraft in and out, that means the aircraft are arriving at different times, perhaps later. Well, then that means you might have to account for additional screening checkpoints for the passengers. Maybe the connection times no longer apply. So those have to be factored in so that you're providing an opportunity for passengers to travel. There may be additional, potential changing to the actual flight times of it, because before, the skies were very congested, but maybe if there's not as much service in the air, flight times might change. So those need to be kind of factored in. And again, it's that scenario approach that was mentioned, where you want to have the ability to say which of all of these elements, not only the commercial side that Renzo mentioned, but these operational pieces, how is basically going to, all of it come together to give us an optimal schedule, and what type of, analysis can we do to find out which of these scenarios is going to be the best, factoring in all of it. And that's where that technology piece that comes in to basically help an airline come up with it, as opposed to trying to do this manually, which just is very prohibitive.
I think that's fascinating, Jeremy, because what I hear you saying is the same kind of data elements are still valid. So, the airlines have needed to make assumptions on minimum connect times, on block times, on ground times, what the capacity is of the airline in the first place. But this effective capacity could change if middle seats are not allowed to be used. But just make different assumptions on the same data elements as before to be able to reflect this operational resiliency and then build the schedule accordingly. Renzo mentioned the demand data. Let's find different sources for the demand data. And as long as the airline is comfortable in a clean sheet and schedule adaptation world, then the new sources of data they're processed can remain somewhat intact, albeit with new assumptions. That goes back to the whole title of this podcast. Is it a new normal or business as usual? And there seem to be elements of both in what you two are saying. Let me now go to how schedule development fits within the overall airline business functions. The difficult functions that interact with scheduling, revenue management, operations, the PSS, and selling the schedule. So to what extent does the new COVID world that we're working in now, how does that affect how airlines develop their schedules in regard to how scheduling function interacts with these other different functions? Is there some kind of integration issue here? Renzo, let me start with you, please.
The nature of these new capabilities will also drive changes in all of the other airline systems. If you think of an airline's ecosystem of technology systems, revenue management systems, operations, crew, reservation systems, if you think of the schedule is at the top. You build the schedule, you plan, this is the plan, this is what you're planning to fly. This schedule has to be communicated both externally and internally to make sure it is actually flyable. So integration with all of these other systems it was important yesterday, but it's even going to be more important now because two things. The frequency of changes will increase, and then the number of changes will also increase. So downline systems will need to be able to either handle a bigger volume of changes coming from the scheduling area, or you need to be able to incorporate some of these rules, some of these constraints directly in your scheduling system so that when you're building these schedules up front, they are already more robust to operations so that the operational areas need to make less changes. I think probably even more important, Jim, than a link with operational systems is going to be the new link between network planning systems and revenue management systems, because both of these systems are really trying to optimize the same thing, network profitability, market profitability. And what you'll see is that some of the old assumptions just are not going to hold anymore. So if your revenue management system is based on historical information and looking at historical flights and looking at booking patterns and building time series kind of approaches based on history, that will not work anymore because the schedule will be changing so much that you won't have access to that stable, historical baseline. So very important for network planning to be able to integrate with revenue management and vice versa. Network planning will be sending some long-term forecasting information to revenue management so that revenue management can seed their forecasting systems. And then revenue management will be sending back short-term information to network planning so that network planning can adjust and adapt and do adapt optimization near term.
So it sounds like a lot more closer coordination between the different functions, sharing of data, designing in common processes. Let's accept that COVID-19 will require airlines to make a lot more changes, and the schedule system itself will adapt to those changes? And therefore, how do all the other downline systems need to accommodate those changes? It seems like it all goes together. Jeremy, let me turn to you because some of these messages sound a little bit too good to be true. So, for example, let's adapt to this new world by adopting a clean sheet approach. And we've got the data to do this clean sheet approach. All of the uncertainty caused by COVID, let's build in a lot more scheduling scenarios and what ifs. And being realistic and practical, as airlines control their costs, there may actually be fewer schedulers working at an airline to do all of this work, what might be more work than there was before. So what are your thoughts on realistically how an airline can accommodate all of this new work with perhaps fewer people?
I can answer that with primarily just one word, and that's technology. Technology is available today. The clean sheet technology, there are airlines that are using this today to their advantage. And again, they were using it pre-COVID, they're using it during COVID, and they're going to use it post-COVID. And you're absolutely right, Jim. The airlines they're having to do more with less. They don't have the army of people that they used to have. However, the work needs to be done, and to some instances, it's actually almost more work because it's an evolving process. We talk operational challenges that they're having to face that they didn't have to face before. So they're having to factor in all of these new adaptations to their schedule, in addition to all the changing of the commercial pieces of it, and they're having to come up with a scenario for it. And as we mentioned before, you don't want to have just one scenario. You want to have the best scenario, and to do that takes time. And time basically is not a luxury the airlines have. But using technology, that's the great equalizer. It allows the airline, regardless of their size and complexity, to let a tool help develop and generate and build these schedules from scratch. Let the tool come up with the optimal network for you based off of the assumption that's right for your airline. And that's, I think, the key element here that's going to distinguish the airlines that are successful and emerge profitable out of this in the long run, is that do not.
So let me summarize for the both of you what I've heard from the two of you today. And please let me know if I've understood this correctly. But what I'm hearing are really three key messages. And message number one is the nature of COVID-19 and how it affects the schedule development process. By definition, it introduces difficulties, challenges, complexity, and uncertainty. And for airlines to deal with all of that, by definition, they need new capabilities. And specifically, they need some process, what you've called a clean sheet optimization process, where the system can tell you, based upon new assumptions, what the schedule should be. That the people no longer manually can do this themselves, again, based upon some traditional assumptions, for example, starting with the same seasonal schedule in the previous year. Also, let's build in some schedule adaptation capabilities. So let's intentionally design in a process of changing the schedule after publication because we know things are going to change. We know there's going to be a lot of uncertainty and that schedules will have to move around to accommodate new demand. So these things need to take place. You mentioned airlines. Some airlines are doing this today. Some airlines aren't. So for the airlines who are, it sounds like let's just adapt to new sources of data using a very familiar process. For the airlines who aren't, they're going to need to apply these kinds of principles themselves. Again, the exciting part of what I've heard, though, is the technology you said is there to do this. Whether they get this from some commercially available system or do it themselves, that the technology is in fact there for the airline to receive new scheduling ideas. Message number two I'm hearing from the two of you, again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that by definition, though, all of these new capabilities will need good data. And the exciting part of what I've heard, though, is that there are new sources of data that could be used rather than relying on their traditional sources of data. For example, historical demand, which may no longer be relevant. But if the airline can be creative in what they see, Renzo's point about airlines being awash in data, let's look at all of the data and adapt it to our new needs in this new world. Also reflecting different scenarios. So if we're uncertain as to whether assumption 1 or assumption 2 will apply, let's build a schedule for both. And let's look at both. The third message I'm hearing is, of course, this sense on how scheduling interacts with downline systems or other systems related to network planning. Again, the core schedule is the core product of the airline. It is what they're selling. So a lot of systems are interested in this. Renzo, you called out revenue management and operations and the reservation system or the PSS, and that we need to assume that interaction will be different. So let's design new processes around all of that. That's really what I'm hearing. And again, back to the title of this podcast, is this a new normal or is this business as usual? I'm hearing from you it's a little bit of both, that there are elements of this that in the old world will stay the same, albeit with new data, but there could also be new capabilities that some airlines may not have used before. They'll need to be able to use themselves to be able to succeed in this new world. Renzo, let me start with you. Does my summary capture, I think, what you've been trying to say? And is there anything you would like to add to it, please?
Thanks, Jim. It was a pleasure, being here. And I would finish with the fact that the airline's network defines its revenue potential. So new capabilities in this area will provide, like adapt optimization, like clean sheet scheduling, will provide clear competitive advantage to those airlines. And it is critical to get this piece right.
Excellent. Jeremy, your thoughts, any last words you would like to leave the audience with, please?
Just also would like to add my thanks for having me be able to speak today to this topic. I just want to reiterate the technology component. That's the great equalizer, and being able to leverage the technology that exists as opposed to an airline trying to say build something internally, which could take months, years. That's going to basically, I think, really signify the difference between the airlines that emerge from this successful and those that don't.
Well, with that, that completes the podcast for today's topic of network planning, a new normal or business as usual. As one last point, I would just make that if anyone is interested to understand more about what the two authors are thinking with regarding to clean sheet scheduling or adapt optimization, they actually wrote a paper on breakthroughs in airline scheduling, which is available on the Amadeus website. If anyone is interested, please feel free to download and read that paper. There's a lot of great information in there. So on behalf of my colleagues at Amadeus, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope all of you found this podcast useful.
And that wraps up this episode of the Amadeus Airline Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and will join us again for future episodes for more insights from the airline experts at Amadeus. Until then, keep up to date with the latest news by following our Amadeus for Airlines LinkedIn account. Thanks for tuning in.